Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. First, I'd like to thank Mayor Albers for inviting me to moderate today's panel. I'm really excited to be in Lloydminster for my first time. I'm partially excited because I'm from Calgary, and if you know, we're in water restrictions, so I've been very excited to get to use unlimited water while I'm here. So thank you very much for that. I feel like I should have maybe brought a load of laundry. And I'd like to thank our sponsors for supporting today's luncheon. And I'd also really like to thank our volunteers from the Lloydminster Oilfield Technical Society for organizing this event and bringing us together. This is a really great opportunity for community. I'd like to also thank Brian Zinchuk from Pipeline Online. He's recording this today, so you should be able to access the recording in the next couple of weeks on his site, Pipeline Online. And thank you to all of you for being here. It's really important that you are here because, folks, let's not forget that Canada's oil and gas industry helped build our nation, and it gives each of us our modern, prosperous lives. Without it, things would be very, very different. And that's why advocating for our industry is so important. And I want to encourage all of you to be a part of it. There are efforts to silence us through things like Bill C-59 that we heard about yesterday. But please, don't let that stop you. You may be wondering, well, how is it that I can advocate? I don't have a great social media presence. But there are many things that you can do. First of all, you can be proud to support the industry. Don't apologize for the work that you do. And please talk to your family and friends. They respect you and they want to learn from you. And if you have young people in your house, challenge their perceptions. The world isn't ending. We have an optimistic future ahead of us. But we also have to speak up and give our perspectives so that the other side doesn't own the conversation. Post videos and pictures of your work sites on social media. I had a great chance to tour around today, and there's so much great work happening. I'd love for you guys to be sharing this all over social media. Another way you can advocate is if you see an inaccurate news article, write to the reporter and the news outlet. And we have Premier Smith here today who can maybe give us some tips from her days in broadcast for how we can break through and get more accurate info out there. You can also attend more pro-energy events. We need community, just like we have here today. And also talk to your elected representatives. We've got two great ones here today, and we've got many more in the audience. And lastly, if you're an industry executive, encourage your staff to advocate and attend pro-energy events. Keep them informed. Your education and encouragement will go a long way. Remember, advocacy is about connecting with hearts and minds, not only with facts and figures. So talk to people in a way that's relevant and that they understand, because you really do know what you're talking about. And although we have two premiers here today who are vocal advocates, we can't rely on government alone to make our case and persuade the public of the value of oil and gas. It's up to each of us here in this room. And so I really hope that today's panel will give you a few key takeaways you can use when you're talking to your family and friends. And now I'd like to invite Premier Smith and Premier Moe to the stage for our panel discussion. All right, excellent. Well, thank you so much to Premier Smith and Premier Moe for joining us. So today is September 11th, 9/11. Many of us know where we were on that fateful day. We still see a lot of global turmoil. It seems, disruption is the norm. Whether it's the war in Ukraine or maybe escalating tensions in the Middle East. So I'm hoping both of you can share your perspectives with us, high level, on the global energy outlook.
The Premier asked me, where were you on September 11th? And I had braces and I was sitting in an orthodontist chair watching it on TV. So I think every one of us have a memory of it, don't we? I was also in the media at the time, so I'm quite happy to give some observations about how to get the message through. But I am so encouraged by where we find ourselves in the energy space at the moment. I can tell you that I've been on a number of different conferences, and I've seen some of the language coming out of OPEC, and in particular Prince Abdulaziz. Bassam al-Assad, and he is very much along the lines of talking about reducing emissions, not production, which is exactly what we talk about. But more importantly, he and I also talk about energy poverty and alleviating energy poverty. We've got a dual role to play, I think, in our industry in making sure that everyone on this planet has the same standard of living that we do. And a lot of that is going to be related to the amount of energy that is produced and used in those jurisdictions. And so when I look at, if we were today to have every person on the planet have our level of consumption so that they had our standard of living, you'd be looking at probably about 300 million barrels per day of production. Now, we know that's not going to happen, but that gives you some idea of where I think that we are going. I don't think we're at peak oil use. I know that they like to talk about that. I think we're going to find more and more efficient ways to use energy. But I think we have to take that responsibility seriously of making sure that we increase living standards around the world. And I think Alberta, Saskatchewan, Canada is going to be absolutely essential in being able to meet that need as we continue to see the increase in demand and the increase in consumption.
I agree with all of that. On September 11th, 2011, I was in Vermilion, Alberta. Actually, my wife and I, or 03, pardon me, or 01, pardon me. I was in Vermilion, Alberta, as my wife and I lived there for 3 years, and I worked in the ag implement industry there. And I remember exactly where I was walking across the floor when those planes hit the towers in New York. The energy poverty, you'd use that term, Premier, and I look at that from a little different perspective, and when you think about wars, that war was a little bit different but mixed, but when you look at what's happening, and I'll make a few comments on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, many wars are fought, whether it be on energy or food poverty, on that basis, or what I call a lack of energy security or lack of food security. And if you look throughout time, that times of unrest are often based in that space. And I think energy security, and I talk about whether it's Canadian energy security or North American energy security, is something that we need to be discussing a lot more openly than we have been, let's say, since about 2015. It matters. It matters for your own general security. And if you look at what has happened, in particular in the Eastern European countries, what they have done is prance around the world, talking down to other countries about your environmental footprint, about your greenhouse gas emissions, and in doing so, they pushed all of their emitting industries out of their countries. They didn't quit utilizing gas, oil, and coal. What they started to do was buy about 30% of that from Russia. They became energy dependent on Russia, which in the last couple of years doesn't look like a very good energy security plan. And I would say, as we look ahead in this country and on this continent, we should never put ourselves in that position, whether it be in the production of our oil and gas, which is the most sustainable and ethical in the world, or whether it be as we look to the future with some of the rare earths and critical elements. We shouldn't be just absolving that and saying that, you know what, we're going to purchase those from another country, namely China. And so energy security matters, and continental energy security for us in North America matters, and it needs to be at the very root of some of the decisions and policies that we make at the provincial level, and I think it is. We're fortunate in the prairies, but it needs to be at the national level as well, and I think that's coming.
Yep, that's worth a clap. Yes. So I think you make a really good point about the importance of national energy security and working together nationally. So what are you watching from the feds on the energy and environment files? Maybe do you have any breaking news you can happen to share with any of us? Or maybe there's things that us, this giant room of energy advocates needs to be looking out for, like the surprise we got with C-59.
I'm looking for one thing, and I've tried desperately to work with the current administration, and I'm looking for a change in the administration. That's it.
Well, if it turns out that the Bloc becomes the new dance partner for the Liberals, I'm looking for an early election as well. Like, make no mistake, Yves-François Blanchet is hostile to our industry. He is very open about wanting to keep it in the ground. It doesn't, the thing that drives me bananas about Quebec, and I saw this years ago, is that the very day that they decided to give an extra $1 billion more in equalization to Quebec because they had extra money left over and the formula allowed for it, that was when François Legault came out and said, we don't want your dirty oil, is how he put it. And so to have a dynamic in our country where we have one province and the political leadership in one province actively working against our industry, it's untenable. So that is one of the things that I think has been problematic about the approach that the feds have taken for so long. They are trying to placate a very loud, vocal, and I think increasingly minority in Quebec for political reasons without realizing or maybe not caring the impact that it has on us in the West, the impact it has on their own financial solvency, because you guys generate a lot of money for us, but you sure generate a lot of money for Ottawa as well. So I would say that one of the things that your industry has done very well, and I'll give Pathways some kudos for this, is by changing the conversation to say, hey, look, yeah, we want to reduce emissions too. We're able to have that joint conversation. I've talked about doubling oil and gas production, because I think we can, and reducing emissions. And we should be aspirational about that, based on my earlier comments. The world is going to need more energy. They're going to need more energy from a reliable partner like us. The Americans are going to need more energy from us as we start seeing a decline in their production also. So I would say our biggest threat at the moment is to see what kind of devil's agreement happens between the Bloc and the Liberals. And I hope that everybody will be very vocal in calling for an election. They have no mandate to be creating a coalition government with Quebec to extort money from Alberta and the rest of the country. We just shouldn't stand for that.
So I'm pleased to hear, Premier Smith, I'm pleased to hear that you consistently say that you want to encourage increased production. So let's maybe talk a little bit about emissions here. So we know, I'm going to put this specifically to heavy oil, but I mean this does apply to the entire industry. So heavy oil does get a bad rap as being emissions intensive, as it requires more energy to produce and refine compared to light oil. And so there are higher GHGs per barrel. So how do you see the Fed's oil and gas emissions cap affecting production in each of your provinces? And maybe if you want to talk specifically to heavy oil.
Well, look, I'm going to fight against the emissions cap because we know it's a production cap. We've seen analysis by various energy firms that do this kind of work that it would reduce our production by 1.2 million barrels per day by 2030 if it was applied at the rate that they're talking about. And when you think about that, looking at even at today's prices, where I think Western Canada Select is trading at around $52 a barrel today, just do the math on that about how much impact that would have not only on our economy, but also on our government revenues. We use those revenues to build schools and hospitals and roads. And so we will fight that because under the Constitution, they do not have the right to determine what our pace of production will be, nor do they have a right to block us from getting our product to market. And we intend to fight that vigorously. That being said, I see, let me go back to Pathways because I'm seeing them at the forefront of thinking through how do you get heavy oil production to be emissions free, and that's what they're talking about. They're talking about having a carbon trunk line where you capture the CO2 and bury it underground as one part. Another part is decarbonizing through a different energy source at source, which would be, in this case, small modular reactors or maybe even larger modular reactors. And then the third example would be direct air capture. And there are a number of different companies. Occidental purchased up the company that had been pioneering direct air capture, and they're rolling that out at many sites in the United States. And so there is a different way to be able to achieve that objective. The other thing I'd say about heavy oil is it is a beautiful product. You can make so much out of it. And when you look at, I understand, and I'm sure this room is full of experts, and you'll correct me if I'm mistaken, but I understand when China receives heavy oil, they use 60% for asphalt and 40% for diesel. So if you're decarbonizing on your production, and then you're using 60% for construction material, you have already massively decarbonized that particular product. We know that carbon nanofiber is going to be another potential product that we can make out of it. And I have absolute confidence in your industry because I've watched it. I've watched you create 6,000 different products out of a barrel of oil. I have absolute confidence that we'll continue to find the best uses for this product. So I feel like we're going to be able to meet that goal, not only increasing our production, but reducing our emissions.
I'd say a like product, whether it's heavy oil, whatever the product is that we're producing in the prairie provinces or in Canada for that matter, it is the most sustainable and ethical product that you can find on earth. So just as a show of hands, everyone in here is involved in the oil industry in some way, and outside of the media and a bunch of politicians. You know, with a show of hands, in the last year or two, you or your company, put your hand up if you've been involved in any way in reducing emissions in the operations that you work with. And that's significant, and that's why you saw when Colleen brought greetings yesterday, talked about an over 65% reduction in methane emissions in the heavy oil play here in Saskatchewan, which extends into Alberta. Danielle will say it's in Alberta and extends into Saskatchewan, but those are small points, but important ones because I have a microphone at the moment. But show me another industry globally, in particular an energy industry, that has reduced their methane emissions by 67 or 68% in relative to 2015. There isn't one. And so kudos to you, to each of you that are working in this industry, and my hat's off to each of you. And I would say that not only are we as a government, and I think I could speak for both the Alberta and Saskatchewan government, when I say that we are so very proud of what you do each and every day, not only on the production side, not only in creating careers for people that we collectively represent across our provinces and across Canada for that matter, but we certainly are proud of what you do from an environmental perspective in producing some of the most sustainable and ethical product that you can find on earth. And we would invite all Canadians to be equally as proud of what you do each and every day in this space for Canadians. Quebecers feel it in the transfer payment. Ontario folks feel it in some of the up and downstream supply chain work that we do, and I think we should equally be proud of what you do each and every day out here in the prairies.
Very well said. So what do you think is the right policy framework to support heavy oil production? And do you think that each of your provinces have it in place? And then are there any changes maybe that you think need to be made, particularly because I think we've really got to work on the lack of productivity, et cetera, that we're sort of seeing in our country due to the lack of business certainty and lack of confidence?
I don't know if we should call it Abkatchewan or Saskberta. That's what, I know that there have been conversations in the past about what would have happened if Alberta and Saskatchewan had never been separated for political reasons all the way back in the day. But one of the things that we have been talking about is how do we create an environment where Alberta and Saskatchewan can work in tandem so that those of you, and you feel it especially here, who are working cross-border, don't have to sort of explain to me why it is that Saskatchewan has so much better regulatory environment, as I kept on hearing this morning as I was walking around the trade show. I mean, we know that there are things that we need to do. I think Dave Yeager was here at your last heavy oil show a couple of years ago. He has been my energy policy advisor since I was in politics the first time. He was Brian Jean's energy policy advisor, and now he's my appointee on the Alberta Energy Regulator. And you may have seen that there's a bunch of service guys who are now on the Alberta Energy Regulator on the board. And when I've been asked about that, I used Dave's line. He said, one of the things you can always count on with the service guys is when you call them, they pick up the phone and they answer you. And that is the culture that we want to have at Alberta Energy Regulator, that you will reach a live body and they will navigate through to solve your problem. And then we will have efficient processes to get well site transfers approved in a timely way. And we will ensure that we have a reasonable policy when it comes to how much methane do you abate? How clean is clean? When you're doing your reclamation certificates, how do we do the reclamation to make sure that you're repairing the land and getting it off your books from a liability point of view? So I think we've got a lot that we need to do on improving our regulatory environment. But I think one of the things that Premier Moe and I were talking about is how do we, I call this cooperation, where sometimes we compete with each other to get there first on the better policy, And then we can cooperate afterwards on making sure that we can work together on that. So we're very open, since we're just starting this process now. We have a new regulator that will be coming in. Lori Persher has announced his retirement, so we are seeking an open competition right now. But this is the time for you to tell us what we need to do to make things better, like Saskatchewan, as I keep on hearing.
I'll come back to that in a moment. As far as policy development goes, I think the first and foremost thing is to have a good relationship between government and industry. And I think we have that on both sides of the border, in particular in this oil play, but I think in the oil industry more broadly. The second thing is there are differences. In Saskatchewan, as you see the Bakken play, and it wraps around the southwestern part of the province and up into the heavier oil play here. There's differences in policy approach in each of those areas, and I think in fairness, when you look at the oil sands versus some of the traditional plays in Alberta, those differences are very relevant, and you do need to be able to be nimble enough as a government, and this is the challenge of the ministers of energy that we have, is to ensure that they have that relationship with you folks in this room, but also the folks in the other plays, so that the policy is matching the opportunities that we have to attract investment, and there is some competition in that space, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is provide that sustainable, ethical, competitive product to the world together as Canadians. And so I think that's about the relationship between the government and the industry. So each of you in this room and listening back and forth, and you being bold enough to suggest not just whatever pops into your head, but suggest realistic solutions that are going to work for the industry, are going to work for the people that in the province or the nation that aren't in the industry. And I think that works quite well. There's a regulatory opportunity that we have, and I think this would be a good place to start that. We're busy for the next 6 or 7 weeks in Saskatchewan as we have an election, and I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. But there's some regulatory opportunities for us, and when people talk about interprovincial trade barriers, it's often regulatory barriers that are there, and they're not intentional. They're just that the regulations were made at a different time in Alberta than they are in Saskatchewan, and we have to do some work, and I think industry can help us to continue to do some work on aligning some of the regulations, whether they be transport regulations, whether they be safety regulations, whatever that might be. And so there's more work to always be done there, and I think we're committed to doing that. Why it should be Saskberta and why Saskatchewan is better in this space is because Alberta took a 4-year hiatus from common sense government between 2015 and 2019.
Touche.
And I say that with an election on October the 28th in Saskatchewan, that I would hope that we don't have to take that same hiatus in Saskatchewan, because I have a feeling you might cruise right on by us.
You have 2 Albertans on the stage here.
Well, if we lose the election, we might have 3.
I think we'll take him. Excellent. So, Premier Moe, could you maybe tell us a little bit about Saskatchewan's plans to increase oil production by 25% with your new multilateral well drilling program? I'm interested in sort of some high-level intel on it, and maybe if you want to give us some specifics for heavy oil, that would be great.
What it is, and anybody that wants to know specifics about the particular program, talk to Jim Ryder right there, and I'll say where this program came from, but it's essentially a royalty incentive. And this is an example of that relationship between government and industry. So we're offsetting, essentially foregoing some future royalties to encourage some investments in the multilateral drilling space, which we think is going to produce more of that sustainable, ethical oil, put more people to work, and ultimately grow our industry. And we're looking for ways to do that in light of a fairly challenging regulatory environment federally. And so what we're trying to do is to work with the industry and put all of the provincial pieces in place so that when that regulatory environment and that certainty level changes federally, that we have an industry here that is vibrant and ready to go. And I think the same is happening on both sides of the border. And so that's really what it is foregoing future royalty revenues to encourage that drilling here today. That idea and the premise came from somebody in this room. And that's where the relationship is so important, is that industry is suggesting things to government. Government actually has a serious look at those suggestions and where they can work for everyone, and they work for the benefit of not only the community, the industry, the province, the nation, and the world. We move forward on. And so we can't move forward on all of them, but don't be shy with the suggestions that you have. Please bring them forward and be bold with them, because I think that's where the success of this industry really lies, is in that relationship between the industry and the common sense governments without hiatuses.
That's a really good point. So that segues kind of nicely into this next question that I have here with regard to revenue. So I think all of us on the stage here are quite happy to have the Trans Mountain Pipeline operational. Shipments began in May of this year. So how has the startup of that pipeline affected the provincial treasury? And if you could sort of speak broadly about revenues in general from oil and gas, and you can extend that into, you know, your coal, uranium, potash, etc. I really think people need to hear the numbers, especially we heard from Mayor Albers last night that Alberta's healthcare budget is like $29 billion. So I think, you know, those kind of things really tie back in.
Premier Moe knew I was going to be taking notes on his multilateral drilling incentive, so I see he didn't give me any details to take away, so I'll have to talk to Jim afterwards. But from an incentive point of view, that's part of the reason why our heavy oil industry exists, is we had the royalty framework that allowed for the companies to recover their capital costs before getting into payout. And then we replicated that with the C-Star program to do the same thing for smaller operators. And it may well be that we have to look at those kinds of things again, especially since so many of the companies are now in payout, and you can see it. So I believe we're getting $12 billion in royalties from oil sands, from sort of heavy oil, and then another $5 billion from the conventional and land leases. So $17 billion is what we're getting in Alberta on a typical basis, based on having about $70 WTI, and then Western Canada Select as a discount from that. So that gives you some idea. And if our health budget is $29 billion, the people in this room are paying a large chunk of our healthcare costs. So thank you for that. You don't get thanks enough from the people who are benefiting from that. And so I just want you to know it is substantial and it's important. And I think that we have the ability to have the kind of tax environment that we do because of the investment that you have made, and all Albertans are benefiting from that. We had hoped that when the pipeline came on board, that we would reduce the differential to $16 a barrel. That's what we were hoping we would see. Because if you recall, back in our darkest days, in the latter part of 2022, that differential was the highest it had ever been at $30 US a barrel. So for every dollar it narrows, I believe our government benefits about $600 million. So we watch that very, very closely. And so I was just looking at it today. I do actually look at the WTI price and WCS price virtually every day. But we're about $13, $14 on the differential right now. So I'm delighted that it's narrowed that much. I'd be interested in knowing if anyone felt like it should be narrower than that. My view is that it is a product that does cost money to get to market. It is more expensive to refine it, and so I think that we would always expect that we would have a little bit of a discount on it. May not always be the case. I mean, I've seen some heavy blends that are trading at or above WTI or Brent. So it may be, as we go forward, that we get a higher value out of it. But I'm pretty happy with where we find the differential now. And what I like to see is that what I'm being told is that because we have that other outlet, because in theory we could sell internationally, I think that's going to create a lot of stability in that differential. That's what I'll be watching over the next couple of years.
Premier Smith and I were just talking about this and the stabilization of the differential, and you know, is it at the right number or not? We can discuss that, but it is more stable than it was a few years ago, and so the egress capacity helps. And then we were talking about Trans Mountain and KXL and Energy East and the opportunities for that into the future. And I think where we are is a reasonable space, but I'm very bullish on this industry. and where we're going in the short to medium term, maybe the medium term. And I think we should all be very bullish on this industry, because the world is asking for exactly what you're producing. And we are going to have an opportunity to move on, I think, a significant number of projects and a significant number of capacity, of product capacity that we are producing in not only the Lloydminster area, but across Canada, with a little bit of a change in the certainty that's provided at the federal level. And I think we should be ready to do that. And in order to do that, so I think where we are is fine, but we should look at the opportunity that lies ahead of us, and that's going to need additional egress capacity. And we're a promoter, even when sometimes Saskatchewan energy products aren't in that particular pipeline. We're a promoter of that, because we need all of that egress capacity out of Western Canada if we are going to stabilize that differential, which impacts the Saskatchewan industry greatly. So I think we need to start thinking about, what those next projects are, and nobody in Canada is saying that publicly, except maybe the two folks on this, well, three folks, two Albertans and one maybe, on where this industry is going and what it's going to look like. We have a plan for growth that we put out. It targets out to 2030. We have said we want to increase the oil production in Saskatchewan out to 2030. That's a little bit at odds with what you're hearing from most North American politicians today. But I think the numbers that we have put forward are realistic, and I think we can actually go beyond them. We just need that little bit of certainty at the federal level. I think that's coming, and I think we should most certainly take advantage of it when it arrives here, in not only expanding our production capacity, but ensuring that we're very seriously and ready to expand some of the egress capacity, so that we don't just find ourselves back in the situation of the wildly fluctuating basis, which has a tremendously negative impact on the industry as a whole.
If I can build on that, anyone who's from one of the Pathways group of companies will know that I've been asking them to go back into their archives and dust off any old projects that they've had, so we can figure out how to get them to market. And I've been having parallel conversations with Trans Mountain, or TC Energy, Southbow, as well as Enbridge, about what can you do? How can you do loops? How can you do widening? How can you do compression? How can we take advantage of the existing egress that you have right now without having to do new greenfield development? The feedback we're getting is that we could potentially get up to 6 million barrels a day of egress based on the current capacity that we have right now, just optimizing it. So we've got room to grow. I would also love to see a restart of some kind of project on Keystone XL. Maybe that route was not the right one. Maybe if they just twinned the existing route, maybe that would have been the pathway to go, because we managed to get Line 3 and Trans Mountain done on the basis of using an existing right-of-way. Maybe we need to also have a conversation about restarting Northern Gateway. That would have been transformative to our industry. I think that was a 900,000 barrel per day project. It was approved. It had First Nations ownership. And that would be a massive game changer for our industry. So I think we've got to be aggressive. I think we've got to be bold. I think we've got to be talking in an aspirational terms to counteract the keep it in the ground folks who are trying to talk about winding our industry down early. Why would we do that? Why would we want to be the first jurisdiction out so that we become more reliant on Iran and Venezuela for our product? Why would we want that? And I can tell you, when I go to the United States, I make that case very boldly, whether I'm talking to a Republican or a Democrat. I say, we are here. We are your best friend. We have direct pipeline access. We are integrated. Why in the world would you be looking to anyone other than us to expand your production? And so I'll keep on putting that message out, but I think that we have every reason to feel optimism if we end up with some of the alignment that Premier Moe was just talking about.
Premier Smith, you have segued very nicely into my next question. So you and I were both at the Canadian Energy Executive Association conference in Banff at the end of August, where you spoke and you got great accolades, I will let you know. You mentioned the possibility of resurrecting the Keystone pipeline depending on who gets elected in the US. So this has been a very contentious project, we all know. So who do you think would pay for it due to the risk of it? Do you see a private company funding it, or do you think government has to fund it?
Well, look, I mean, I was pretty excited to see that Hal Quisley has taken over the TC Energy assets on oil, and I think he's pretty bullish on trying to find a way to do the kind of things that we're talking about. And I think we have to be realistic. If we end up with a Republican in the White House, I think that we end up with the Keystone permit being signed into law the same day. I think that that is how strongly the Republicans feel about energy security. If we don't, and we have to wait a little bit longer until we have Pierre Poilievre in Ottawa, then maybe we shift gears and start looking at Northern Gateway, especially if we end up with a BC premier who also wears the Conservative team jersey. So I think we have two incredible opportunities ahead of us. That being said, we have a very good relationship with the current U.S. Ambassador to Canada, David Cohen. He came out for an event that we had during Stampede on transportation corridors, and he can talk about the stats of Canadian oil and gas better than anyone that I've met in America. He knows how reliant and how reliable we are as a trading partner. That said, I think we'll probably end up having more of a natural gas discussion with America if it's a Democrat in the White House, because I look at natural gas not just as a transition fuel, but as a destination fuel. If you build out the infrastructure for natural gas, that helps you build out the infrastructure for perhaps a future ammonia economy or methanol economy or hydrogen economy. There is no reason in the world that we would stop on the development of natural gas. And so, especially if you pair it with carbon capture, as we're seeing increasingly. So I think we have two different conversations depending on who's in the White House. But that being said, we are very good friends with America. We've had 4 years of Democrats in the White House, and our amount of bilateral trade has gone up. We have $184 billion worth of trade that goes between Alberta and American states. And I don't think that's going to change. I think it's only going to grow. We just have to make a slightly different argument when we're dealing with the Democrats, Republicans. With Republicans, you lead with energy security. With Dems, you lead with energy affordability. But in either case, we've got such a great story to tell.
Fantastic. Well, we have about 5 more minutes here, so I'd like to do 2 kind of rapid fire questions for you. So the goal of this second last question is to give our audience 3 key points that they can use when they're talking with their family and friends about energy. So please provide 3 key takeaways with respect to energy in your specific provinces.
The energy, Canadian energy, is the most sustainable and most ethical energy that you can find on Earth. Second point would be people should buy more of it, and we should collectively be proud of it as Canadians. We should be proud of how it's produced. And last but not least is rooted in every policy decision and every conversation that we have, and the U.S. is here, we need to start talking about being energy secure in our nation. If you are not energy secure, you are not secure on any front. Energy security and food security are something I think Canadians have taken for granted, and we just shouldn't. So I would say it's the most ethical and sustainable product that you can find. We should equally be proud of it across this nation and how it's produced. And last, but certainly most important, is we need to talk about the security of our energy supply as Canadians.
Yeah. I would just echo that. Security, reliability, affordability. That if we're talking about having an integrated North American energy security policy, I think we're winning. And I think that is a message that can also assist our federal government in being able to achieve its NATO commitments of 2%, that we have to talk about energy security and defense support in the same breath. And the premiers agreed on that. Is why we led so strongly on it, is we know that if we do not provide the Americans what they want, they are not going to provide us what we need, and that is open trade ties. Reliability is absolutely essential, and I know that there are still, because I was at the carbon capture conference in Edmonton, and one of the lefty media, as so many of them are, cornered me and said, well, shouldn't it be solar and wind and batteries? Shouldn't that be what we transition to? And I have to say no, because we believe in science. And what science tells us is at 5 o'clock in the middle of winter, sun doesn't shine. And wind doesn't blow when it's minus 30. In fact, they have to power down the turbines when it gets lower than minus 30 because they will break mechanically. We also only have battery power that lasts for an hour. So I can't tell people at 5 o'clock when it's minus 30 in the middle of winter, hang on till the sun comes up at 9 o'clock in the morning. So we know that we have to have reliability as number one. There is room for a responsible amount of solar and wind to be on our grid, but we also have to make sure that we are investing in the kind of energy that we know will provide that reliability. That is number one. In Texas, where I just went down and met the governor last week, when they had their power outage, over 300 people died. And that is something that we have to be very frank about. This isn't an academic ideological discussion. This is a very practical discussion about our obligation to make sure that we're providing reliable energy for our people. And then affordability. We hear it all the time. You're probably hearing it on the campaign trail. There are a lot of really hurting people right now. And I can tell you this proof point because when we did a reprieve on the fuel tax, when Premier Moe did a reprieve on the natural gas tax, I'm still waiting to see how that turns out for you. He's already told me he's prepared to go to jail if it comes down to it. When Wabkanu in Manitoba gave a reprieve on his fuel tax, each of those time periods corresponds with the lowest inflation rate in the country. There is an absolute connection between the carbon tax charged federally and the amount that we are paying for everything, because every step of the supply chain to get goods to market just magnifies that effect. That's why people understand the connection, that if you're going to make the cost of everything more expensive, the way you solve that is by reducing the carbon tax. And I have to tell you quite frankly, I know people keep putting pressure on us to say, well, why don't you reduce your taxes? They should be reducing their taxes. They should not be cannibalizing our source of revenue that we use to pay for roads because they want to have an ideological tax that costs you about 35 cents a liter on every fill-up that you have. So it's why I have been advocating against the retail carbon tax. I know Premier Moe has been advocating against it. Heck, even the NDP, who are the ones who saddled us with this kind of tax in the first place, have now changed their minds and are now advocating for a reprieve on these types of taxes. It's because it's bad policy. It doesn't work. It's punitive. And affordability has to be the number one thing that we care about so that we don't end up seeing middle class and vulnerable Albertans and Saskatchewanians hurt, because that's what's happening right now.
Okay, I hope I can just take one more minute, because I really want to end on an optimistic, positive note. So please tell us one thing that each of you are optimistic about when you think about the energy future.
I want to follow up here with 30 seconds. Correlating the carbon tax on whatever it is and everything to the inflation rate it's proven, and that is there. And I know that's shocking to every Liberal in Lloydminster, but it isn't that hard to figure out.
Is there a Liberal in Lloydminster? Come on, show me, where are you?
That was the first thing I just wanted to clarify for the Liberals in Lloydminster. The second thing is I'm not moving to Alberta. I love Alberta, but I love Saskatchewan as well, and I was born and raised there. I just want to make sure that's clear for all the left-wing media. Brian Zinchuk. And last but not least, I would leave you with this on, from our province's perspective in Saskatchewan, we have a lot of good things happening. We have, tens of billions of dollars that are being invested into the mining industry. That's a big industry for us, different products that we mine. Agriculture is a little bit more average or less than average this year, but has been really strong over the course of at least the last decade. We have new mined elements that are coming on, and so we're really starting to hit on a lot of cylinders in Saskatchewan, because as Alberta had a 4-year hiatus, we had about a 50-year hiatus on common sense governments in Saskatchewan, but we're catching up, and we're catching up quickly, and it's showing in our economic strength. And I would say that between Saskatchewan and Alberta, when you look across Canada, that economic strength is quite evident. But I would leave you with this. The industry that I see with the most upside over the course of the next number of years, it's this one. And it's already starting in this area with some of the investments that we see coming into this area. I am very, very bullish as a politician in Saskatchewan that isn't moving to Alberta, to clarify. I am very, very bullish on the opportunities that we share between Saskatchewan and Alberta, a little bit into BC, a little bit into Manitoba, and probably some in Newfoundland. As Canadian oil producers, I think we have everything to shoot for in the next while, and I couldn't be more excited about where we're going after 8 pretty challenging years where we've been just scraping and scratching to hang on to what we have.
I'm looking forward to seeing what the next innovations are. We had a chance to tour around out the yard, and it's amazing the innovations that are already out there to address environmental issues, to address safety issues, to address emissions issues, and I know that you'll continue doing that. And I would say that what I love about your industry is you find the workarounds. Oh, can't transport something by pipeline? That's okay, we'll put it on a rail car. Can't transport it in liquid form? That's okay, we'll find a semi-solid form to transport it. On natural gas as well, and there's a few of you, I think, who play in both spaces. So let me just say where I think a massive opportunity is there for us. One of the ministers that I have leading one of my files, Technology and Innovation, Nate Glubish, he said, why are we fighting against all of these different forces to build a pipeline to get natural gas to China so that they can build a data center? Why don't we shorten that supply chain? Why don't we build the data centers here? Why don't we create processes where we don't have to rely on the federal government to say yes or no? That was part of the victory in winning against C-69, is that intra-provincial projects now firmly fall under our purview to regulate. So when you look at what heavy oil did up in the oil sands, where you didn't wait around for the province to decide to build generation, you built generation, then said, hey, we got so much of this stuff, why don't we build a transmission line so that you can help your consumers? And that was a great model. That's the new model for AI and data centers. They need a massive amount of energy. So why not create a business park, and I look to the municipalities to do that, where you can have natural gas flowing there to fuel a 1,500 or 2,000 megawatt natural gas plant, co-locate your AI and data centers, make sure you've got good broadband, and then if you happen to produce more electricity than you need, sell it back into the grid so that you can create some price stability for consumers. That to me is a massive opportunity, and I can tell you just a couple of things. One is you're seeing TC Energy talk about this. Anywhere along a natural gas line is going to be an ideal opportunity to locate that. Number two is all of the big data companies are now having to recalibrate on their emissions profile because they've realized that even though they love to come to Alberta to buy green energy credits from solar and wind, when it comes right down to it, they need reliable and affordable power. And so what they're finding is that they're locating to states where they can get that, because they can only be down for 14 seconds at a time. They run such important systems, they cannot have power outages. And one of the things you're seeing in America is some of these states are saying you cannot have diesel generators as backup. So they're saying, well, where are we gonna go? And we're saying, come here. And so that is another, I think, massive opportunity. And these are huge, huge projects. We've already got requests for just 6 projects that want 1,500 megawatts of power. And we're talking about hundreds of projects. So I would just put that to you. Like there is an opportunity, because you guys are finding ways of capturing methane and turning it into animal protein, capturing methane and turning it into power, capturing methane and turning it into Bitcoin. If you can think of a way that you can couple your environmental needs to be able to reduce methane with some of these new and emerging opportunities, we have such an advantage. And I think you're going to see a lot of investment in this area. And we are working very hard to make sure that everyone knows about it, because we want to be a government that says yes to this and manages to clear away a lot of the barriers. This should be something that can be approved in months, not years.
And whether it's oil or gas, electricity, whatever it is, there is one example, and there's many, of the thirst that the world has for energy as we look ahead. And so you can see why we're so bullish on what you do each and every day. There is a thirst that I think Saskatchewan, Alberta, and I would say Canada at some point can really quench in that quest for more energy, more electricity, and it's a global ask. We do it from the energy side, from the oil and gas side, Alberta in much bigger form. We have uranium that we work on in that space as well, and getting into some of the other critical elements. But if you look at our nation, and more specifically look at Saskatchewan and Alberta, this is a place where you can still bring projects from exploration through development to actual production on whatever the product is. And when you look at what the world needs, and that's one very good example of it, we're in a very good place and we're poised for success. So be excited about your industry and know that we are.
Totally. Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I don't know about you, but I feel very optimistic, and I'd really like to thank our two premiers for giving us time today, and I apologize for keeping you a little longer. I think you're going to get hauled off here. But thank you for your advocacy. It's not easy, but you keep doing it and stay courageous. You have a room full of people that have your back, so thank you.